I knew a girl one time, but she's going to know who I'm talking about, who, when she was dating and engaged to her fiance, had, as most of us do, when you marry, it's two families blending, right? And so she famously said to her dad, "I'm not marrying his family, I'm marrying him." Now, once they got married, later on, there are, of course, families blending, have differences and so forth. And she comes back to her dad and she wants to sort of vent and say, "This is my problem and his family is blah, blah, blah." And his response was, "But I'm not marrying his family, I'm marrying him." You don't do that. When you marry, it's a whole family and so forth. And so with that comes this question: can I be a Christian and not go to church? Well, that's a multifaceted question we'll try to narrow down in just one short video. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian, a project about what it means to have a relationship with God and how do I live that out. Now, can I be a Christian and not go to church? There's so many different aspects of this. I'm trying to funnel it down. Some people are just talking about not ever wanting to get out and go to church. Some people, and I'm using that phrase intentionally, some people just want Jesus and want nothing to do with church and think church is man-made and Jesus shouldn't have anything to do with it. It's just something we came up with. There's all kinds of different opinions. Forget opinions. Let's just answer this question. Can I be a Christian and not go to church? Well, going to church isn't a thing. It's basically like saying, "I'm going to family." Now, you don't say that. "I'm going home for the weekend. I'm going to go see my family," that sort of thing. And that's what going to church really is. I'm going to family. So it's not really a thing in that sense. And we don't need a reserved building. You know, we could be Christians and we could be the church without this reserved church building with all kinds of odd decorations. And they're only odd if you're outside of that spectrum and you look back in on it. We don't have to have all these traditions. It can be done. In fact, the first century looked very different from the way we quote unquote do church today. So I use that phrase, but now you understand what's the real meaning behind it. Let's look at this. Jesus is part of the church. It's not like you have Jesus here and the church here, and they're two separate entities. He's actually a part of it. Let's look at some scripture here, and I'll try to get this out in a timely fashion. He is head of the church. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 22 and 23 say, "And he put all things under his feet and gave him his head over all things to the church, which is his body," meaning he's the head. We are the body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. How about Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 12? "To equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ." Are you starting to get the picture? It's just like family and that fiance. You don't separate them. It's a package deal here. If you reject church, you reject Jesus because he's part of it. So he has also, with that, of course, established a church. Probably the most popular verse is Matthew 16 and verse 18. "I tell you," as he's talking to Peter, "you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." He calls his disciples family. You know, I know this is pre-church, but he is establishing and setting it up basically so he can essentially open up the church as a family for people to be a part of, if you will, those who are saved. And the Lord adds us, according to Acts 2 and verse 47, as we are obedient. But before that, as he's building this, he has his disciples that he's closest to, those 12 that he chose. And in Matthew 12, 48 through 50, it says, "But he replied to the men who told him, 'Who is my mother and who are my brothers?'" That's Jesus talking to him because Jesus' family had come to see him. He's doing his work, his ministry work. And so he says, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Now, see, you want a relationship with Jesus, it comes with other people. There are other people who are actually brethren, brothers and sisters, family. And Jesus is so intricately woven into this, you cannot have one without the other. And I'll admit, many times in church, we lose focus on Jesus and we are focused on ourselves and focused inwardly instead of Christ as the head. So here's another concept. Can I be a Christian and not go to church or be a part of the church or reject the church? Well, Another way of looking at it is you can't gather by yourself. Weird way to say it, but it's true. You can't gather by yourself. So I want to give you some definitions here. The meaning of the word church itself, as you have it translated. What does that word mean? Notice, I want you to listen closely here. And I've talked about this a few times over because COVID has introduced a new concept, sort of a new concept, but it's popularized this concept of I can just be on my own, do my quote unquote church thing, and that's all good. Well, here's the meaning of the word church: a gathering of citizens called out from their homes into some public place. I've had people say, well, we have church, it's just me and my family. Well, there's a lot of problems with that. That family has trouble on its own keeping itself accountable. Family has trouble on its own with a lot of things, but the literal meaning says called out of your home into a public place, an assembly of the people convened at a public place of the council for the purpose of deliberating. In a Christian sense, still talking about the meaning of this word that we have in English as church, an assembly of Christians gathered for worship in a religious meeting, a company of Christians or of those who, hoping for eternal salvation through Jesus Christ, observe their own religious rites, hold their own religious meetings, and manage their affairs according to regulations prescribed for the body for the order's sake. Those who anywhere in a city, village constitute such a company and are united into one body, the whole body of Christians scattered throughout the earth, or the assembly of faithful Christians already dead and received into heaven, are referred to as the church. All that fits into that word. And what do I want to get out of that? You can't gather to yourself. It is literally a gathering together. And I know I have family members who think that they can be as separate as they want to be and as by themselves as much as they want to be and still be part of it. And the Bible simply just does not bear that out, and they can't be separated that way. Notice the following in Galatians. Well, let me just say this. Follow the reasoning. If you are a part of Jesus, Galatians 3:27 says, for as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. So if you are a part of Jesus, you're part of the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 13. For in one spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one spirit. So if you're a part of the church, you're a part of a family whose description literally means a gathering of the called out. And you cannot be gathering by yourself, of course. So a quick note to those who regularly gather at these appointed times. That's the way we say it, right? Those who normally gather at these appointed times, you do well. You do well as long as you're not on the checklist system. What's not good is if you think the idea of being gathered together is maintained with a 4-hour-a-week diet. It doesn't mean you have to go to a building. It doesn't mean you have to gather with every other Christian of your quote-unquote local congregation. It doesn't mean any of those things. But if the only times that you're gathered with your brethren, your family, is during those 4 hours, I mean usually for Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, that usually constitutes about 4 hours a week. If you do that and you feel like you are living out what the meaning of the word church is, you're sadly mistaken. It is about much more than that, more than just checking those worship boxes or Bible class boxes. So let's finish this up here. Next, after talking about Jesus and the church being intricately woven together, part of each other, after talking about how the meaning of the word church is to gather, the last thing I would say is don't be so selfish. Let me explain that here. You are looking for lines basically to get away with something. You're too lazy to get out. That could be it. You may have other issues. Look, I have a daughter who has a panic disorder, and I mean a diagnosed panic disorder who at times church is a trigger. And what do I tell her when she can't gather and she can't get out and can't meet? I'm not going to tell her she's in sin because she's really battling something. So I'm not dismissing people with real issues, but there's a lot of laziness that's classified as an issue. There's also a lot of, I want to do what I want to do, and let's make the Lord's part as small as I possibly can. And if I don't have to get out of the house, even better. That's an aspect of it as well. So a lot of times people are looking for lines so they can get away with something. Here's another question. As far as this don't be selfish concept, Jesus serves the church. Why won't you? Let me read to you. Ephesians 5:25 through 27. Jesus serves the church, so why won't I? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that her again is the church, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any other such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Verse 29 says this, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. Jesus still serves the church now. So in chapter 4, if you back up in Ephesians, I should take that example, right? If Jesus can serve the church, why can I not? And that's really part of it too, the selfishness that I don't want to serve other people and do for other people, or people get on my nerves, and on we could go with excuses. But it says in Ephesians 4, rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint which is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Let me say this too. I've heard people say, I had a lady say to me one time, an elder's wife said, well, evangelism's just not my thing. Well, then heaven ain't going to be your thing. Teaching people, doing exactly what Jesus came here to do. Others say stuff like this about church. Church just isn't my thing. Heaven is not going to be your thing either, because what do you think heaven is? It is this gathering. And it's granted, heaven is without all of the temptations, without all of the people. Everyone is perfected at that time. Nobody has any issues. We never argue about anything. It's nothing but sheer happiness forever and ever. Well, here's the thing. You can't just hold out for the perfect part. You can't just say, well, I want to go to heaven and be gathered with everybody, but you're not willing to do it here. You're not willing to work here through relationships. You're not willing to put up with people, forgive people, endure people. All of those things that we have to do with each other as responsible brothers and sisters. You can't just hold out for heaven and wait for the perfect version. Let me give you 1 John chapter 4 and verse 20. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. So, can I be a Christian and not go to church? Well, let's just answer in these 3 ways once again. Jesus is part of the church. You can't reject one without rejecting the other. You cannot be gathered by yourself, which gets to the meaning of that word. And please, just don't be so selfish. It's just for a little while. Get involved. There are other people who need you, and the church can't be what it needs to be if everyone else, or if everyone doesn't plug in. If we all become selfish and want to do our own thing, imagine the chaos and what it would do. So hopefully that answers the question. I want to thank you for being with us today. If you're watching on YouTube and you've not already subscribed, you can hit this button, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out. Also hit the notification bell, the like button if this video helped you, and leave a comment. For those listening on podcasts, we appreciate you being here as well. We're asking you to subscribe, rate, and review because it helps us out. And everybody, please share this with somebody else. Maybe it'll help them too.